When Christopher Ducharme was 14 years old, his mother was murdered by her boyfriend. The tragedy has had a lifelong impact on him and his family. He now helps other victims who need support, love, and understanding. He is the founder of BC Victims of Homicide, and he sits on the board of the BC Bereavement Helpline. It is my pleasure to welcome Christopher Ducharme to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Nice to meet you, and a brave son you are. I can't imagine, nobody can imagine what it must be like to hear that your mother, your father, anyone close to you has been murdered. Where were you?
Where was I? In which regard?
When you heard?
When I was 14 years old, I was actually just coming back from spring break, visiting my father in Edmonton, and we arrived at the airport in Victoria with my sister, and my mom never showed up at the airport, and so we called my other brothers to pick us up, and they did that, and we actually made a number of attempts to call the police and call family, friends, and family to find out where she is. And it was actually a phone call later that evening that we got from the police saying there was a sudden death, and that's how we found out.
And who told you more? What's the process?
The process that day, so once we got notified over the phone that this happened, it was the next morning that we actually went into the police station. Over that night we spent with my another relative, and the next morning we went into the police and basically gave our statements. So that's the first thing, is to give your witness statements, and then we basically just had to start deciding where we were going to live, and we decided to live with my aunt. And it's just a whirlwind of emotions just coming at you, and being 14, you're just lost, right? So.
Sure. I understand.
Yeah.
Your mother murdered by Brock Graham?
That's right.
Was her longtime boyfriend, or?
They had dated for 3 months prior to her death, and he lived with us those entire 3 months. And we weren't, not informed that he was a prime suspect in a previous murder.
In a previous murder, former Vancouver police officer.
That's right.
When did you know he had been arrested? How long after your mother's murder?
Actually, the morning that they questioned us, the next morning, I actually gave them the license plate for my mother's car, and they found him that evening in Richmond. They put a Canada-wide search for him to find him, and he was found at a pub in Richmond that evening. So it wasn't long before they captured him.
Who helped you in the early days?
The early days, it was family. We really stuck close to our siblings. My aunt, who's my mom's sister, she took care of us. So she took all 4 of us into her home, as well as taking care of her own 4 children.
Right.
So I have her to thank for that. And,
sure.
And it's there's a lot of families out there that just don't have that the family support. And so.
Yes, I was thinking about that last night. Like it's if you had no family support, if you were truly alone, and lost your only parent or one of your parents, then you would have to go to the province or the government for help, or a victim services for help.
That's right. Friends. But the way that the system's set up, it's so difficult for victims to find that help, to find where to go. I know things have changed and improved over the last 15 years, but at the time, and what I see a lot of now, being a previous youth worker, is these kids turning, and myself as well, turning to alcohol and drugs, and turning to the violence like we seen last night. And and I got stuck in the middle of that, and just so many lost souls, and really it's about unresolved grief.
Of
is
course.
What I see a lot of that.
I would understand that, and then the cops have to attend to the offender. That's their job, and try to care for the victims, but they don't have that much time to care for the victims. So the system has to be in place, and I know it is much better now for helping living victims of homicide. Still a ways to go.
That's right.
What would have helped you at the time? Now that you can reflect.
At the time, I think. You have your family, but I think organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, a lot of people that don't have those families, those are organizations that, as a child you can relate to, and relate to someone and spend time with them in a healthy way. So otherwise you're just going to get caught up in the wrong thing.
Well, and I'm sure you need somebody to hook you up, because it must be such a nightmare. Do you know what I mean? You're not exactly computing, and you can't believe this has happened to you, and as a young man, did you feel completely powerless in many ways?
I did. I was able to find some methods of really coping and finding my inner strength, and I think that's number one, is to try to find a faith. For me was really important at the time, my faith. You know, poetry, art, talking to people and sharing was the number one.
Sure.
You know, just.
And I think it's very difficult for people around anyone who's been through this to talk to you about it.
Very true.
You know, how do you bring that up? How do you say, Chris, I'm so sorry about your mom, that she was murdered? People are afraid to even go there, I'm sure. I mean, they're sorry and they're sad, but most of us have no idea what to say.
That's right.
Really.
And that's the biggest struggle about being a victim of homicide, is finding people that can understand or that want to understand, because so many people are just afraid. They don't know what to say. And as a victim, the number one thing is just talk about it with me, listen to me. And and every victim that I've met feels the same. And so these support groups that we're trying to create are exactly
so good
that.
Because to allow yourself to mourn is a gift.
That's right.
And everybody doesn't have that gift. They think, I've got to get over this. I shouldn't feel this way. It's a horrific thing that's happened, but I've got to get on. And sometimes you just have to be there with your grief.
That's right.
Did you find that?
Yeah. I mean, you go through phases, and especially being an adolescent, you know, there's the natural phases of life, you know, that you go through. But just stepping back a quick second to what you're saying about feeling like people have abandoned you. You know, I went back to my high school, and every person that I ever knew and all my friends, none of them could talk to me again. They ignored me, and I had to change schools. I had to move. You know, it was so hard for them, but it was so hard for me.
Sure,
you know?
And you were in Campbell River, right?
It was actually in Burnaby.
Or in Burnaby.
We moved back from Campbell River to Burnaby. With my aunt, yes.
With your aunt, then. But but your mother was murdered in Campbell River.
In Campbell River, that's right.
Small town. Everybody knows, and I'm sure when you came to Burnaby and they say, people tend to whisper about things like this, as you know. You walk in the room and you know everybody's saying, that's him.
That's right.
That's the guy whose mom was killed.
Was going back to the school I was originally at, because we were only in Campbell River for 6 months, so it was going back to all these familiar people. But it was the top story, you know?
Sure.
It was a real big story.
In the media spotlight.
That's right. And the media makes it pretty hard too. But
how much information did you have to testify in court?
I did. My brother and I were both witnesses, so that was a real challenging process. We attended the pre-trial for the whole next year. We weren't allowed to talk to our family about how she died. We weren't allowed to talk about any of the details. And then we show up at the trial, and out of 16, I don't even know how many witnesses because I wasn't there.
Right.
But about 15 witnesses. My brother and I were the second and third last ones. So, you know, here we're out shopping and doing things on our own while our family's in the courtroom, and not being able to hear this information. And then, you know, 15 years later, I just got the transcripts 2 years ago, a year and a half ago.
So it took that long. Is that procedure, or why is that?
You know, I'd like to tell you an answer.
Don't know.
Don't know.
But as we look at criminal justice system and how we can improve or change things, that could be one of them. And every family is different, I'm sure. It's not like you have to read the transcript from the trial. Were you not allowed to read it, or it just wasn't available?
It was going to be at a cost, and it was a couple $1,000s per day. And, you know, I'm not going to pay that as a victim. I just didn't feel like that's fair. So
do you get an Innocent Victims Fund? From the Innocent Victims Fund, do you get money if you're family, or just if you've been hurt? You know, somebody is assaulted. There once was an Innocent Victims Fund, but I don't think there's money for families.
I've never heard of that particular funding. There is some funding through victim services that's for counseling and such. But